So originally, I was going to make this video about my thoughts on Endwalker. I was going to do this big, epic analysis of Endwalker and what makes it so great, and how it's almost the perfect conclusion to the story Final Fantasy XIV's been building up to for over a decade. I started multiple drafts of the script and restarted over and over, trying to find that one nuanced thing that I could base my entire discussion of Endwalker off of. I didn't just want to talk about how great Endwalker is, because yeah, we all know it's great. It was a solid expansion with an amazing story that ties everything together, while also being a genuinely interesting final chapter in everything we've seen so far. Loose ends are tied up, places that have been built up since 1.0 have finally been revealed to us, and the main conflict that started eons ago with the ancient Ascians came back to provide some of the darkest moments and most satisfying payoffs in Final Fantasy XIV to date. But for me, it's all almost a little too obvious. Like, yeah, the expansion as a whole is really good. Not much for me to add to that discussion. And while I may still make a giant overarching analysis video on all of Endwalker at some point, I feel like the best way for me to get my thoughts out there and to actually say something meaningful is to instead break down the expansion and discuss its various scenes, focusing on specific parts that I thought really stood out, whether for better or for worse. And once I made that decision, I knew I had to talk about the scene I felt stood out the most, at least to me. And, oh boy, is it for the worse. Hello, I'm Mootsky, the Salt Exarch, and today we're going to be talking about what I feel is the single biggest misstep in the entire expansion of Endwalker, the story of Ultima Thule. Now, before you get mad at me, I do want to say that I love Ultima Thule as a location. It's just so somber and dark and horrifying to find. You've journeyed to the ends of the universe to fight Medion, and you find yourself stuck in this desolate place where the echoes of civilizations that have already died out linger. Shades of the individuals who once populated the myriad stars across the universe remain, cursed to forever wallow in their memories of despair and acceptance of the end. It's chilling and existential, and it only hammers home what you find out in Elpis. Aetherius is the only star left with any life on it. You're alone. And it should feel like this. This is right before the climactic confrontation with Medion, for the sake of the universe. If there's a time to make the Warrior of Light feel like they're alone and hopeless, especially in an expansion that centers around hope and despair, it's now. And yet, while the location and the stories of Ultima Thule's inhabitants capture this idea very well in my opinion, the story itself really doesn't. And the problem is, they pretend to kill off all of your friends in the most blatantly transparent attempt to create suspense and garner emotion I have ever seen from this game's MSQ. Ever. It all starts when Medion detects the ship coming, and because she's made her nest in a literal sea of dynamis in the middle of an empty void, she can basically just immobilize everyone. Thancred's the only one who can stand up to her, but you and the rest of the Scions pass out before you see how that confrontation ends. And the next thing you know, Thancred and Medion are gone. So this is a solid beginning to this part of the story, because you don't know what happened to Thancred. He's not on the ship, so that's probably not a good thing. And finding out where he is and what happened to him becomes the main factor once you finally land. It's a good way to build up some suspense and get you invested in Ultima Thule's story. So far, I have no problems with any of this. Then, you eventually find out that Thancred sacrificed himself to create the very land you're standing on. There shouldn't be anything in Ultima Thule, but when Medion tried to unmake Thancred, his essence and last wishes physically changed the surroundings, and is maintaining this dreary place at the edge of the universe. That's really dark. It really makes you feel the hopelessness of Ultima Thule. You and the other Scions shouldn't even be here. You shouldn't even be able to survive. And the only reason why you can is because Thancred had to sacrifice himself just so that the rest of you can even breathe. But then, you find out that you can't progress through the area unless another one of the Scions does this again. And thus begins the immediate decay of this really dark and interesting area into a slog of overdramatic self-sacrifices as you burn through the Scions like they're just keys to the next level. It becomes less and less believable that any of these deaths are going to stick, and what should have been the Warrior of Light's darkest moment before the final confrontation becomes a dull point in the story that ruins a lot of the potential of what is otherwise a really cool and dark area of the game. That might be a bit harsh, but no, it's literally this bad. There are a number of issues leading up to this. The first is that, at this point, they really have to sell the death swell, or else you're just going to be skeptical that they're actually going to kill off any of the Scions, let alone all of them. The last time we had a proper Scion death and it stuck, it was Papalima back in Heavensward, unless you count the other character assassination that was Ida, but that's a topic for another day. The argument's there that you could also count Minfilia as well, because technically she lingers around in the first through the Oracles of Light, until she sacrifices herself to give Reen her powers while allowing her to keep her individuality. But in my opinion, that feels so far removed from A Realm Reborn Minfilia at this point, that I'm kind of hesitant to count it. On the contrary, let's look at the Scion Death fakeouts we've had since then. In Stormblood, Ystrola gets severely slashed by Xenos, almost dies, and is put out of commission for the rest of the 4.0 MSQ. And this isn't that long after you just got her back from being trapped in the lifestream for most of Heavensward. In Shadowbringers, Y'shtola almost dies again, and Thancred's fight with Ranjit ends like a straight-up death scene. But then he's just up in the next scene afterwards, tending to his wounds. To be fair, his character arc with Reen hadn't come full circle, so maybe this was never meant to imply that he was going to die, but it's certainly framed that way, especially with him slowing the flow of ether in his body for that crazy stealth move and then collapsing afterwards. Whether or not you count Thancred, they then proceed to spend all of post-Shadowbringers teasing you with whether or not they're going to kill off our boy Graha. Ultimately, they find a way to both kill him off and keep him alive, and honestly, with all the speculation and memes going around leading up to this was just a brilliant troll move, and I can't even be mad. Basically, at this point, saying, "Oh look, we're going to kill a Scion," is the Final Fantasy XIV writers' equivalent of crying wolf. They would have needed well-thought-out, dramatic scenes to make us believe that they were going to kill off one Scion, and I think they still would have been hard-pressed to make us believe they were going to kill off all of them. Did Ultima Thule deliver on that in any way whatsoever? Absolutely not. It was just a conga line of over-the-top pre-death speeches as each of them disappeared. From the beginning, with Thancred, you're told that their presence still lingers. How am I supposed to believe that we won't get the Scions back when we're literally told that they're not actually dead when they disappear? Hell, Y'shtola even spells out that you have the Crystal of Azem and can probably summon all the Scions back at any point, but just can't because then Ultima Thule wouldn't exist anymore. Like, if the writers were actually trying to sell that they were going to kill the Scions off, don't literally have a character spell out a possible way for them to return. It's not a clever setup, because at this point we just got Azem's crystal from Hydaelyn, and we already know exactly what it does. This is just the game saying, "Oh no, Ultima Thule would be uninhabitable if you brought all the Scions back with your summoning crystal. Too bad there's definitely no potential way that something will happen later in the story to remove that restriction so you can summon all your friends back." It's not even subtle. It would be one thing if each of the Scions was doing something really cool or dramatic for the sacrifices, like anything that I would consider a proper send-off for the characters we've come to know over the course of the story. But outside of Thancred, they just all get surrounded by this dark swirling burb energy and vanish. And for what? To unlock the next area of Ultima Thule? I get the lore of the area is that we're at the edge of the universe and literally can't move forwards without their sacrifices, but is that really the most impactful way you could have had each of the Scions sacrifice themselves? Every other time we genuinely lost a main character, it was to something big. It had some amount of build-up and weight to it. Orjafant sacrificing his life to save the Warrior of Light from the Heavensward, Izale going full primal on a Garlean airship to prevent the Scions from literally getting shot out of the sky, Minfilia to save the First from total destruction, Papalimo to seal away Shinryu and give the Scions enough time to deal with what was built up to be a Bahamut-level threat, Ardbert to save the Warrior of Light and give them the strength to take on Emet-Selch and save the First, Crystal Exarch Graha, and yes, I'm counting this one, to seal Elidibus within the Crystal Tower. Here, it's just, oh, I guess we can't progress any further, let's just throw another few Scions on the Ultima Thule fire, and there we go. And I'm supposed to believe these scenes hold any emotional weight to them? Anytime you have a death in any story, it should serve a narrative purpose. It's not just enough that the player is emotionally invested in these characters and doesn't want them to die. That's a good way to get an emotional response from the player, but unless there's a deeper meaning or purpose behind it, it comes across as feeling shallow. This is especially true if you're just going to undo the deaths later. Killing characters off becomes cheap when it's clear that the only purpose of the scene was to make the player feel bad that they're dead, and it's even worse if they're just going to come back completely fine not too long after. But Salt, you moron, it actually doesn't matter if the player knows that all the Scions will be brought back, because that's not the point of the scene. These moments are supposed to highlight the Scions and their determination and feelings of hope in the face of despair, and the Warrior of Light having to deal with their absence. It's character writing, and clearly you just didn't understand. Okay, first of all, the Salt Exarch isn't my name. It's a title. And second of all, if this is just supposed to be an exercise in character exploration, and the writers never intended to sell these scenes as actual sacrifices, then you'd at least expect the writers to put in the actual effort to make them well-written character moments that really dive into the Scions in a satisfying way, right? Well, they don't. Okay, to be fair, some of them do. Thancred kind of gets a half speech because he just gets to talk a bunch to Medion while they're on the ship, but he doesn't know that he's about to be unmade by Medion's bird magic. That being said, he does get to say a few lines that reflect the story arc of losing Minfilia, so that's not too bad. And to be fair, Estinian's speech is probably the best one. I mean, it fits both his character growth throughout the story, and he's saying it to a dragon. He talks about how the dragons are thriving on Aetheris, and about how peace can't be obtained through inaction, and that resigning yourself to your fate isn't always the best or only option. All lessons he saw firsthand through his own journey through the story. This one, I have no problems with. The others are just really not great. Y'shtola's is... Well, I love my girl Y'shtola, but, like, what was the scene even? Out of nowhere, Y'shtola waxes lyrical about how she wants to pursue all knowledge for knowledge's sake, and how she wouldn't be happy living in ignorance, and how she believes that learning and knowledge is worthwhile in its own right, even if it's fleeting. I made a video about the subtleties of Y'shtola's character and how her personality is slowly revealed to the player over the course of the story, but this is the exception. It just slaps you in the face with something Y'shtola hasn't really talked about all that much. Sure, you know she's a scholar, and they've definitely shown off her curious nature from time to time, but nothing this heavy-handed. Unlike with Estinian, it's really hard to buy that this is worth the same emotional weight, and the wording behind it is also just really awkward and doesn't fit Y'shtola that well. The best I could say about this is that it does tie really well into Y'shtola's motivations in 6.1, but that was after this scene. The other scenes are also really weird. Like, with Urianger, he just joins in with Y'shtola so she's not alone in her sacrifice. Which is nice and all, but at this point it seems kind of needless. We just saw that the swirling burb thing works with a single person, and while we have gotten scenes implying that Urianger and Y'shtola have a close connection even among the Scions, he literally just kind of piggybacks off of Y'shtola here. Like, do the writers think Urianger doesn't have a big enough drive or motivation to get his own speech? What he says kind of implies that he wouldn't have the resolve to sacrifice himself on his own. But that's just insulting to Urianger as a character. Also, don't even get me started on G'raha. They barely gave G'raha anything more than an empty rehash of his final wishes as the Crystal Exarch in 5.3, which was, mind you, less than an expansion ago. He says that he wants us to take him on adventures, but like, we've been traveling with him since 5.4. The least he could do is acknowledge that we've been fulfilling our old promise, but no, he just says that he wants more grand adventures, and then he talks to the robot guy about the philosophy of what makes a person who they are. That part at least fits, considering the weird way that he's an alternate universe future of himself fused with his younger self's body, but like, come on. The twins are a really mixed bag here. I get their whole thing is that they don't want to have to sacrifice themselves and leave the Warrior of Light all alone, but they know they have to, but they barely process and acknowledge their own grief here. Everything they say is framed around how the Warrior of Light must feel, but considering the game has them react more to each of the Scions' deaths than the Warrior of Light does, I feel like they could have had a really nice scene where the twins open up to the Warrior of Light about how they're feeling about the loss of all their friends, or to try to get the Warrior of Light to more openly admit and acknowledge their grief, and maybe even give the Warrior of Light some dialogue options and a chance to be vulnerable, especially if the purpose of this whole area is to make the Warrior of Light feel burdened and alone. As it is, it just kind of feels awkward with Alisaie basically speaking for you, and her and Alphinaud having a conversation between themselves with you standing there. Just in general, I don't really think these speeches land in terms of emotional weight, and regardless of whether these death scenes are fake or not, they still should hold the weight of these characters thinking they're never going to see each other again. I really don't think these moments captured that well, and aside from maybe Thancred and Estinian, I don't think they're particularly strong character moments for the Scions. But Mootsky, you still totally missed the point. They're not supposed to be the perfect emotional moments for each of the Scions. They're supposed to highlight how the Warrior of Light feels when they slowly lose everyone around them. It doesn't matter if the moments themselves are strong send-offs for each character, or if the player knows that all the Scions will come back. The important part is that the Warrior of Light thinks they're all gone, and to explore the weight they feel when they don't have anyone to lean on. To that I say, first off, since when do you call me Mootsky? And secondly, yeah, sure, that might have been the intention of Ultima Thule, but I really don't think it lands, and here's why. The Warrior of Light might be a character in the game, but newsflash, the Warrior of Light is also a reflection of the player. It's their avatar that they project themselves onto. If the writers can't sell the loss of the Scions to the player, then this moment is going to hit weaker as a result. If I'm projecting myself onto my Warrior of Light, then these scenes need to do their best to make me feel the same sense of loss and weight that my Warrior of Light does. And if they can't, then these moments don't work. This is even more egregious when you consider that the Warrior of Light barely reacts to anything that's happening here. We've seen the Warrior of Light get really emotional before, but the reactions we see from the Warrior of Light here are almost laughably stoic. If I am supposed to be feeling the loss of each of the Scions, then having my character standing around and giving a few sad looks really isn't selling the true weight of the moment any more than the actual writing does. We barely get any dialogue options to express how we, as the player, are feeling as we go through Ultima Thule, which makes the final build-up to losing the twins and feeling the weight of the world on our shoulders feel so unearned. Like, I'm not saying that the Warrior of Light wouldn't feel like this after watching their closest friends and allies disappear, but at least show that to us, and let us express it, rather than just having us standing around as usual, but then once we get to the last area, have Alizé break down for us and tell us how burdened we must be by the Scion sacrifices. I'm not even saying that they shouldn't have given the Scions death scenes here just to bring them all back later, but I am saying that they really needed to put in the effort to give these scenes the proper weight and narrative meaning that these characters deserve. If the purpose of these scenes are to set the tone for Ultima Thule and to remind the player that they can't progress through without sacrifice, at least make those sacrifices feel real and meaningful. If the purpose of these scenes is to explore how the Warrior of Light feels when each of their friends are stripped away from them one by one, then show them react to it. Give the player a chance to react to it, and make each moment feel real and emotional and earned. Even if you're not trying to sell these as death scenes, you still need to make the player feel the weight of that loss, and if you don't put the effort into that, then don't expect the story to hit as hard. As it is, Ultima Thule's story fails at being a proper series of convincing death scenes, fails at being a good character moment for most of the Scions and the Warrior of Light, and I just think it falls flat on any potential narrative purpose it might have been trying to serve. Basically, the only thing I really liked about it is the end, where you walk up to Medion's little rock, summon Emmet and Hythlodaeus, plant a bunch of flowers, and then summon all the Scions back. That moment was pretty cool, even if I think the story leading up to it takes away from its impact a little. That's just how I feel anyway. If you like these scenes, good for you. They just really didn't hit me right, and I remember Ultima Thule being a total slog because of it. Anyway, I'm going to stop complaining about Ultima Thule now. This was a bit more of a casual discussion than my normal videos, and honestly I'm probably going to start putting out more videos like this. I've been really wanting to upload more frequently on my channel, and yes, I know this isn't the first time I've said that, but my Lore of Eorzea videos take time to make, and I just generally feel like I have more things to talk about if I let myself be more casual and just talk about the story. I might also branch out to talking about other stories outside of Final Fantasy XIV, or just writing in general, but don't worry, that isn't to say that I'm done with my Lore of Eorzea series, I'm definitely not, and Final Fantasy XIV content will still be the primary stuff on my channel. Also, I'm sorry for this video taking so long. As I mentioned, this video started out as a huge discussion on all my thoughts on Endwalker in general, and I've been working on it for quite a while, writing and rewriting the script a number of times. It just kept getting really unfocused and not very coherent, and I didn't have one theme or discussion to tie everything back to like I normally do, so I wasn't liking how it was turning out. That's why I decided to talk about just the scenes I have particularly strong feelings about. Most of them are positive, but I really wanted to get this one out of the way first because I think this is easily the weakest moment of Endwalker. Expect more discussion of Endwalker stuff soon, and a Lore of Eorzea video coming up as well. With all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, do be sure to leave it a like. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, be sure to drop them below, and subscribe if you want more Final Fantasy XIV content from me. Also, be sure to check out my Twitch streams and follow me on Twitter, and if you want to support me financially, check out my Ko-fi page, all linked below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.